Hello, everybody. This is Rachel Augusta. I work with animals who are sick, injured, diseased, or have been abused, or maybe suffering from old age. And today I am speaking with one of my very favorite women on this planet who has not only changed my life and my views of growing older, but is on a mission to change so many other women's lives, and she already has. Her name is Lisa Betts-Lacroix. She's a podcaster, a speaker, an actor, and a dancer. She's been featured in Wired magazine, on CBS News, Swiss TV, and in over 100 films, television episodes, and movie of the week. As a host of the Superpower You podcast, she has produced and hosted 80 plus episodes of long form interviews with brilliant guests who reveal the mental models and tactical skills needed to be your very own superhero. She's also a dance performer and speaker who inspires audiences to embrace vitality and passion and reclaim empowered living in later life. In spite of taking up dance at the age of 50, she is a world champion pro-am American rhythm ballroom dancer. Everybody, this is my super awesome friend, Lisa. Hi, Lisa.
Yeah. Hello. I'm so thrilled to be here.
I'm so glad you're here too, and that we're doing this with each other, and that you're my very first.
I'm so honored. I'm your first guest.
I actually feel like it's really fitting with just you in general, because you do a lot of firsts.
I do. I'm a little bit addicted to being a beginner. I feel like I just like to do new things all the time. Yeah. I think it's for me at least, it's a very powerful and fun way of approaching life. So yes, I do like to do new things.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, we came to know each other through the Women Speak Mastermind.
Yes, we did.
That is where I really got to know you and your mission in this world. And it's about empowering, would you say specifically women or just women and men?
I think it's a message and a need that's more relevant for women. I think that aging and the way it shows up is true for men too. But I think it's a deeper and more, it has a lot more juice to it for women, because I think that in a lot of ways our culture has it be more impactful and more of an issue. I was just thinking yesterday, by way of example, that, because I'm doing this gray hair grow out thing, right? Which a lot of women, I know personally, but there's a whole movement towards it. And I was thinking yesterday, I was actually writing something about, remember the times when gray was considered distinguished for men, but for women, it was you're letting yourself go. So that's just an example of the fact that, sure, aging is an issue. It's a reality. It's not for the faint of heart for anyone, regardless of gender, but it's kind of more up for women in our culture.
It totally is. Yeah. Was it Betty Davis who said growing old ain't for pussies?
Did she say pussies?
I think she did.
I think it was Betty Davis that said something like that.
Yeah, it was Betty Davis or Joan Crawford, which is...
They probably both said something like that.
They both said it. One said it isn't for the faint of heart, and the other's like, no, for pussies, because I want to one up people. So it's true, though, that men have always been allowed to age in a different way than women have been allowed to.
Yes.
How, in what other areas have you seen that? I know I've seen it in Hollywood as well.
In Hollywood, for sure. You can just look at something. Some of it's evolutionary, right? Some of it's biological. The fact that men can have babies at any age sets up for a different reality, whereas women actually realistically really do feel the impact and the impulse of that ticking clock. And that impacts everything. It impacts how we behave. It impacts how we approach relationships. It impacts our vulnerability towards around the choices that we make. It impacts another related thing, which is the fact that women still make 70 cents on the dollar. I don't know which comes first. It is possible that that's a cultural bias that says, well, women are going to be, you know, I don't know which direction it goes, because the reality is that when women make 70 cents on the dollar, they are more likely to be the ones who are taking the career hit when kids come along, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a whole other conversation that has a whole bunch of layers to it. But I would say that there are many areas in which women, fairly, unfairly, just realistically, um, have aging be more of an issue for them. Oh, I'll give you another example. Women tend to be the caregivers,
Mm.
or the across the board. Whatever needs caring, women generally are going to be the unpaid caregivers.
Right.
And how does that impact? I think that it's sort of like when we have prescribed expectations of one gender over the other, then that impacts the choices that we make in our lives. And so as our families age, as we age, if we're the ones that are more likely to be taking care of aging parents, say, for example, then that, it makes aging more of a reality for us. It means that aging impacts us more.
Right. So what actually, okay, so you have done so many really interesting different things with your life. You were, living in LA, working as an actress. Now you're in the Bay Area and you have this podcast and you're impacting women, you're doing all this stuff. But what led you to the topic of wanting to talk about how we need to rebrand age, and that being 50 doesn't mean that you require a walker? And like in your talk, you're like, people think that when you're 50 you need to have a magnifying glass because you can't read your cell phone and you're look like you're limping across the street, and that's not true. Like, what led you to that moment of being like, I really need to start talking about this?
Well, I think that it was accumulated awareness. And like you mentioned, Hollywood. I quit acting when I had my first child when I was 33. I was a film and television actor. I did my first, I was always an actor. I worked in theater and I studied acting and did musical. I did all kinds of different acting. I modeled to put myself through college. So I did sort of more industrial type work, but I did my very first film job when I was 24. And then I quit acting when I was about 33 when I had my first kid. And at the time, I felt that I was partially quitting acting to focus on family, but I also was was experiencing that very true aspect of Hollywood at that time. I would say it's changing to some degree now, where the roles start to become fewer and far further between as you get into your 30s, and they become less and less interesting. Just the roles for women at that time were less interesting than they are now in general. And I just felt like this is, so I saw my age impacting my career choice. And so that was one first thing. Then I spent 2 decades raising my kids. And I guess if I was to simplify it, I'd say that as my kids started to get older, when my older child was 14, I started to realize that I was going to be facing a time when my kids were going to be leaving. And I had put a lot of years into raising them. I independently educated them, or I use the term homeschooling. It's a bit of a misnomer because, like I say, we didn't stay home much and we tried to create an alternative to school. But I really put a lot of energy into my kids, into educating them, into building communities around progressive learning, attachment parenting. And I started to see that that was not going to be my life all the time. So I went out and I began dancing. And I tell the story in my Rebranding Aging talk a little more condensedly, just for drama, where I was looking in the window and I saw, the truth is I really wanted to dance. And I did see these kids dancing in the window of this dance studio. And I won't tell the whole story that I tell in my Rebranding Aging story, but it's basically about.
Before you go on,
Yeah,
actually, I want like what comes up with that, because I love this story and actually do want to go deep into
okay.
the story. Is that, do you think after like 2 decades of focusing on your children, all of a sudden you had this sort of like empty nester syndrome. And that's where like a lot of women are like, I don't know what to do with my life. I've given my life to my children and now I want to have more kids. Or was it?
I saw that coming. I knew that it was coming. And I guess this is why it's hard for me to, I've actually never been asked this before, believe it or not. There's a lot of components to it, right? And you would even back up to say that when my first child was born, so I was in my mid-30s, and I think my first kid was about 2, I read a book called New Passages by Gail Sheehy, and it's all about, seeing menopause as a chance to rebirth yourself. I mean, that's how I interpreted the time. And my husband, the father of my kids, said, "Why are you reading a book about menopause? You're 35. I was like, I don't really know. But the reason is because even at that age, I saw that coming. And I, on some level, I think unconsciously, was afraid.
Right.
Like, I'm 35 and I see this future. What am I going to do with it? And I kind of wanted a little bit of advance warning about how I could approach it in a more positive way.
Okay, that's beautiful. Also, you and I have said this, before. We are so similar. We're so different. You and I are so different and so similar.
Yeah.
I've always had this fear of growing old, which we're all going to. So what's the point of freaking out over it? But
well, you're not alone. Most people have it.
This fear. And it's interesting at 35, you're like reading a book about menopause, but it makes sense that if you're like, I know because I'm realistic that I've already let my Hollywood career go.
Yes.
And now I have kids. I'm going to be with them for 2 decades. So I really need to be thinking about who I am as a person, what I want to do, and I'm going to do it now. And
yeah, it was not that conscious, but that's essentially what was going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you started kind of already thinking about how to rebrand what age looks like when you had your 2-year-old in your mid-30s, planning for what you would do in your 50s.
Yes. And part of that was because, to be honest, I mean, I love my kids. Anybody knows me knows, like, I adore my kids. But the transition was really challenging for me. And this, I'm reminded of our conversation for my podcast. Leaving acting was a big challenge. I went from, in 1 year, I went from living an independent life in LA. I've lived in Topanga Canyon. I was a film and television actor, and I was working on, various TV shows there, Murder, She Wrote and Chicago Hope, and was doing I was working. I was an independent actor. In the same year, I went from living independently to being married, to being pregnant, to having a kid, and to quitting acting all at one time. And I'm telling you, when I became a mother, I was like a deer in headlights. I was like, oh my God, what have I done to my life? And so that set me off on, it was, I guess I started to say that it was not an easy transition for me. So I started to really think about, is this my life? Like, what's coming next? There was a part of me that felt like, what have I done to my life? And so I think that was part of the unconscious thing about looking into where it's going.
Yeah. This is why you are such a sage. You're such because you were thinking already, like, what's coming next, instead of, this is my life. And then, then when that life pivots or changes, all of a sudden these people are like, I have nothing. I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. I haven't set myself up for anything. And so that's really interesting. So this had been like rolling around in your brain for a couple of decades, pretty much since you had kids, as to how you were going to age and what that looked like. And maybe knowing that your life wasn't just like, okay, now then I'm going to wait for them to have kids so I can be a grandma.
Right. And I mean, you just you've mentioned something a couple of times that actually is a lot of times our human motivation for things, and that's fear or challenge, right? Something happens to us that makes us afraid, or we have existential angst or concern, or and when we are faced with either things that make us afraid or that give us concern or give us pain, often that's the time where we say, oh my God, what am I going to do next? So it's that fear that can be the driver. And then, but the question is, what is it that you do with fear or pain or loss or grief? And I do think it's true that I have sort of, maybe it's natural, maybe it's cultivated, I'm not sure, maybe a bit of both. Inclination to say, okay, there's something painful or scary. What am I going to do about it? And, I think it can be either. It can be natural or it can be cultivated. Um, but yeah, on some level that was going on. It's interesting. I had never put that piece together of reading that book. But interestingly, one of the things that I got from that book, I think it was from that book, maybe it was from something else, but just because I'm in conversation a lot, I mean, I'm surrounded by, in my life, I have been for the last 20 years, amazing people in the same situation as me. So when I started homeschooling, I started a group with a friend of people homeschooling kids for academic and intellectual reasons, like kids whose needs weren't getting met in school. And that group, not really by particular design, we plan to keep it small, but it's grown because we're in the Bay Area where there are a lot of people who are willing to do things outside of the box and who have a lot of smart kids in this area. It attracts, intellectually strong, high bandwidth people. So our group has grown. We've tried to keep it small, and we always have between 350 and 500 families in that group. And so what I had around me was this collective of amazing, powerful women who made the choice to put their careers aside for all the reasons we spoke about earlier in order to raise their kids and be involved in their kids' education. And they had previously been lawyers or professionals, and they were dealing with much the same thing I was, which was, oh, wow. And here I am looking at all these women now whose kids are growing up, who are in a situation where they're facing empty nest, but they're also facing a situation where they've lived in a culture where they place their value and their mission and their passion isn't been in raising independent, brilliant children. And now their kids are launched and they're thrilled that they've been a part of that. But then when I'm looking around, I'm going, wow, there's all this amazing, rich resource of incredibly progressive thinking, intelligent, educated women who are like, oh, now what? And the thing that comes to mind over and over again is what you already referenced earlier, which is we have many chapters in our lives. And I have lived that already. I started out living that and I struggled. I put myself through. I made myself so wrong for changing directions. But really, in reality, what we look back and we see is that, especially for women, we have multiple chapters in our lives. And when we see that and know it and embrace it, then we can be empowered by it.
Instead of fall into fear and depression.
Yes.
Which is one of the reasons why I really wanted to interview you and talk to you, is because even though, we have different missions, we have very similar missions. Like I work with animals, but I support their humans, and their humans, my clients are women. And why your message is so important for me to share with them is because we know that human emotions impact our animals' health, especially if they're negative. And fear and depression is going to be hard on the animals that they live with. It's hard on everyone around us, right?
Yeah.
But the animals that they live with, we know that it can cause a cortisol increase, which leads to tumors and leads to cancer. And so I know so many women who, have hit this stage of their life that you're talking about. And, it's whether it's that they had human children and these human children have moved out of the house and now, they have their beloved fur babies, but they still have this empty nester. They're not really sure what their purpose is in life, or they've retired and now they're like, I don't really know. Like I know a cubicle. I know waking up at 7 a.m. and doing a 9-to-5 job, but I don't know me.
Yeah.
I don't know who I am because I had to sacrifice that to bring good people into this world, or to pay my rent, or to pay my house bill.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm at this stage of my life where society has told me I'm old, I'm not sexy anymore, that I can't dive into things that I would have when I was 20 or 30.
Yeah.
And that I really should pull out my crochet needles and yarn and put on my big undies and sit down and watch prime time, which is depressing.
For me, it would be. I'm sure there are people who get a lot of meaning out of that, and that, and so not to make it, not make anything wrong. And also in terms of I know you're making like a sort of joke about the reality, what that might look like. I don't know. I could imagine myself crocheting. I love doing creative things.
I actually crochet now. I crochet now, but yeah, I love crocheting and knitting. To all the crocheting and knitters out there, I'm down with you. It's really good. I love it. But yeah, my point is though, is that it's then our time to like
do something new, learn a new skill.
Yeah, but it's a like, if while we're talking, I'm thinking we've been told basically as women to support other people from the time you are very young, whether you're 20s or 30s, you're supporting. You need to support other people. You need to support other people so that when you get to this stage in your life, it's like, I have the choice to keep supporting other people if they're even around.
Yeah.
Or
dealing with the grief and loss.
Screech halt and turn the car around, which is scary.
Yeah.
But it's like, I don't have my own human children, but I know human kids well enough because I was one that when I was 18, if my parents still wanted to parent me, I'd be like, no, get out of my life. I have my own wings. I jumped out of the nest. I need to be away from you. And so, it's like, you have to, at some point, when I say people have left you, your kids, when they're out of the house, like they're out of the house for a while. They'll come to you when they actually really do need something. So your purpose changes a little bit.
Yes.
But it's like, but that like you're supporting other people, but you have to be able to support yourself. And if you've spent decades supporting other people, that's a hard and scary transition to go, oh, wait, now me.
It is. It's really hard. And, I love that you're bringing up that piece of the parenting journey that is challenging, which is allowing your kids to go. And I think it's really important because there's two sides of that coin, right? There's the fact that it's a complicated dance on both sides. And it's a complicated switch in relationships. I don't know how many of your community have kids. I don't know if but
a lot of, so the people I work with, their babies are fur babies.
Yeah, that's what
but that doesn't mean that they haven't had human children.
Right.
It's that, their human kids are like, yeah, I'm out of the nest now and I have my own family. And, these women are in their 50s, 60s, 70s. They're not going to have kids.
Yeah.
So either they've chosen not to throughout their whole life, or they did, and now their focus is the animals in their life.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that whether you have human kids or you have fur babies, it doesn't matter. If you're human, you're going to deal with loss, right? And I know that it doesn't matter if you're talking about obviously different death. I know that the death of a child is going to be quite different from a human child is going to be quite different from the death of a parent, and all deaths sort of differ in archetype, but loss is loss. And I know that if you have a fur baby that's precious to you, when it dies, it's devastating and a journey of grief that you can't go around, you have to go through. And so I think that's the one thing that's consistent for us as human beings is that we deal with grief and loss. And statistically, the reality is that as we get older, we deal with it more often. It's because we know more people, the people around us are older, the babies that we've had have been with us longer, the fur baby, so we deal with grief and loss. And I think that is one of the realities of aging and of being human. And, I don't have any simple answers about that, but I do think it's one of the things that I think people need support in navigating, whether it's just being assured that the path that they're on through grief is the one that they have to go through, knowing that it's going to change as time goes by, recognizing that in some way there's some freedom, like maybe there's space now for you to look at what you want to do next. And I'm guessing that most of you people love their fur babies, and maybe do want to get another one quickly? I don't know. Or maybe
everybody's different,
or maybe it's a time like, I love my fur baby and I've had this baby for the last 15 years, but maybe I want to spend the next year before I get my next one traveling. you know?
Totally.
And
Totally. Exactly. And it's like knowing, kind of who you are and being able to, I mean, I think that's part of the process is figuring out what excites you and what makes you happy. And that's why I want to spend some time talking about that moment. I love the drama behind that moment, and I think you should make
yeah.
it as dramatic as possible because you're an actress, and it speaks to me. And I want to tell everybody that when Lisa spoke, and I'm going to share her talk with you in the links, that all these women in the audience were crying because it's like we all relate to it, whether we're there now or not, but or we know we will be. But your moment I want you to explain the story of dancing and how you came to that and your fears around it, because I think that's so important to this whole message of like what it looks like to grow old, but to still want to live and have an enjoyable life, and that it's not about like, okay, well now I'm just waiting for the casket, because that's not what life is about. And you say in your speech too that, we're living longer.
Yes. Yes.
People aren't dying at the age of 70. I mean, some are, but I think what are they predicting in 100 years?
I mean, there's the thing that I quote in my talk is there's an outlier person who's very involved in the anti-aging and longevity movement who says that there's a possibility that the first person who's going to live to be 150 has already been born. But the reality is that every decade, a higher percentage of people, by a pretty big margin, there's a higher number of people living to be 100. And there's never been the level, there's never been the amount of, longevity. And the thing that I point out that I think is really important in that talk is that as human aging gets longer and as aging biologists give us longer and longer lives through science and medicine, that a lot of people think, well, oh my gosh, I don't want to live to be 100. Well, why? Because they're thinking of the old story of what 100 means to them. But in reality, what aging biology and science is doing is it's actually giving us a longer midlife. So what's happening is that the period of time in our middle years is healthier than ever before. And statistically, aging and death is actually happening closer to when we actually die. So suddenly we have this expanded midlife. I would argue that we haven't expanded everything. I think our adolescence is a bit longer. Our midlife is a bit longer too. And so that's the thing that's really new is that suddenly we have this vibrant decades of potentially vibrant living. If we take care of ourselves, if we optimize, if we have the right mindset and attitude, if we stay engaged in learning, like there's all these things that if we do, we have a greater chance of optimizing our midlife. But the reality is we have this midlife before us that's like this opportunity to do stuff.
Right. Which it is an opportunity because if all of a sudden people like, oh, I'm 50, my kids are out of the house and my Hollywood career's over, so I'm just going to hang out and wait to die. You might be hanging out for a really long time.
Or you might not be one of the people that gets the long life because you don't have the mindset and the attitude and you're not enjoying it because you're not going to be setting yourself up for as much success as you could. But yeah, I think that the other thing is that going back to, one of the things in my talk that I mentioned is that I just lost my train of thought there. There was a couple directions I could go. I guess I'll tell a little bit piece of that story of how I actually came to seeing this like very clearly, which is that I was at this point in my journey with my kids, and the other thing, part of my message is we're changing all the time. We do have not only different chapters, but we're constantly evolving. And as women, we know change, right? More than men do. Our bodies change more visibly, more extremely, more radically over more years in more different ways and so we know change from the time we're young. They have a growth spurt when they're young, but we then go through, menarche and we get our periods and then our bodies change and then we get pregnant. Some of us get pregnant, our bodies change there and we gain weight, we lose weight, we're impacted by hormones. We know change. At the time that I'm talking about, I was, I was like definitely, I put my attention on my kids. I did a Facebook Live recently where I talk about the fact that I didn't wear earrings for 8 years. My focus was on my kids. And I was feeling not very physically attractive. I was like definitely my heaviest ever in weight. I didn't pay any attention to my skin, to my hair. I just like put my hair back in a ponytail, and like always. And I just thought, this is my life now. It's all downhill. I had that belief. Once you go over the hill, it's all downhill from there. And I thought I was already there. And so when I walked by the dance studio and I looked through the window and I saw these kids dancing, and it turns out they were really high level Latin competitive dancers who were like 14, 15 years old and amazing. And honestly, it's like, I like to refer to it as this moment, like in a movie that Richard Gere and J-Lo are in called Shall We Dance? And it's called Shall We Dance? And just looking at them in the window, oh my God, whatever that is, I need to do that. And then there was a part of my brain that was like, don't be silly. You're a 49-year-old homeschooling mother of two who's like 30 pounds overweight. And like, that's not you,
Yeah, you're like, I don't even wear earrings.
I don't even wear earrings, let alone like sequins.
I'll never look that sexy.
Exactly. But I really was so compelled. So I walked into the dance studio and I asked the receptionist, I just drilled her. She must have thought who was this woman. Like, what are your classes? And when do they start? And how much are they? And what types are they? And what type of dance was that? And, and then I kind of got excited. And then I walked out and I was like, oh my God, too much. But then the next day or 2 days later, I walked back in. I was like, okay, it's me again. I'm back again. Okay, tell me again, what were those classes? Which ones could I take? And I bought a card of 10 lessons that let me, gave me 10 classes. And I talk about how I didn't use the card of 10 classes. And at the time, I don't know what my thinking was on it, but now when I look back from my perspective, now I realize that I didn't use it because I was afraid. I didn't go take the class because of that feeling like, who am I to do that kind of dance? I'm like, I'm too old, it's too late. And so I didn't do it.
It's too
sexy. I'm like a mom. Hello.
I mean, honestly, like I'm not a mom to human kids, and I would be like, I don't know. That's stuff you have to learn when you're 10.
Yes, because that's actually when like most high level competitive and performing dancers start, and or maybe when they're teenagers, but they start early in that world. And so I thought, it's ridiculous. So anyway, I did go back. I don't like to waste money. I learned it from my mom. And so I saw this card expiring. I was like, oh my God, I have like 3 weeks left. I think it even expired. And I went back and I said, I know it expired, but can you please let me use it? And they did. And I took a class and I just loved it. I really, really just loved the embodiment and the movement. And I just loved it. And that turned out, and
how did it make you feel? Like, why did you love it so much? And also, at any point were you like, when you first started doing it, were you like, I hope I'm not being judged?
Oh,
that
yeah.
would be my fear. Oh my God, they're judging me.
I think so. Well, especially as I got more serious about it, like there's a lot of people who are like, sort of, I think they kind of see them as the, the little old ladies who are like, like,
oh, you're cute.
You're cute, exactly. That's one of that. But
you won't be mean to you because you're this cute little old lady going gray. Yeah,
exactly. But as I got more serious about it, then I think I started to feel and I felt free. I felt embodied. It's just fun. I just personally love partner dance, and just the caveat on that is dance might not be the thing for everyone, right? It might not be what the thing that makes other people come alive, and that doesn't matter. I think that the point is that it's just an example of something that you find that you're on some level in your head, what it is, right? On some level, I always wanted to do partner dance. I always wanted to do ballroom dance. I kind of had it in the back of my head. And for other people, there's something in the back of your head that is kind of like, I always wanted to do that. Mm-hmm. It might be something different. So as I got more and more serious about it, I started to feel that fear that you're talking about a little bit more. Like, oh, I'm feeling serious about this. I'm competing. And then I started to feel like, oh, maybe they're going to be like, you didn't start early enough to be serious, But luckily in ballroom dance, like in most really, in most fields, there is a space for people to compete at their level, in their age group, at their level. And so I just embraced that. And I had a teacher at the time who basically said to me, you should be competing. And interestingly, he said that to me about 2 weeks after I'd written down this goal of this year, I want to do a ballroom dance competition. And then 2 weeks later, he said, you know what? You're learning quickly. You should compete. I was like, funny you should say that. Where do I sign up? So I got the message, right? I set the intention out, which I think is an important thing too.
Mm-hmm.
I set the intention. I named it for myself. I didn't tell anybody about it. I was a little embarrassed by it. I was a little bit like, that seems kind of unrealistic. But then I got the message back that, yes, this is the right thing. And I saw it and I grabbed it and I ran with it. And I did 5 competitions that year. I did like 10 or 12 the next year. I kind of jumped full on in. And then I won I won a world championship in my age category because I was so into it and I was working really hard. And that was really fantastic and really fun. And here's something that I don't tell in the story that I think is interesting and potentially useful for other people. And you'll like it because you're a performer. Maybe I mentioned this in the podcast. It's the idea of the triple threat, right? So there was a point in my life where I said, okay, where are you going to go with this? You really want to be a dance performer. Lisa, that's ridiculous. You can't be a dance performer. You started when you're 50 and now you're 54 years old. You're too old to be a dance performer. You're not even an actor anymore. And I also was coaching people and speaking here and there, but I hadn't really taken it on as seriously as I have now. And I thought, oh, there's so many people speaking. You love speaking, but you're never going to be like the best speaker in the world. And, and then I thought, okay, and I'm aging and I feel like this. So I looked at those 2 things and I thought, well, how can I what are the 3 things that I could bring together? So where maybe I'm never going to be the best dancer in the world, and I'm maybe never going to be the best speaker in the world, but maybe I can be the best dancer who speaks about aging, in the world.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like this idea of like the triple threat. Okay, where are the pieces? And you don't have to be the best of the one, but if you merge them, then you have this sweet spot where, like for example, for you, there's lots of people who do animal healing work, right?
Right.
But there aren't so many people that can speak about it as hilariously as you can. I bet you, right?
No one else, just me.
Yeah, so it's like, where do we find these things that are our natural talents, or like I'd say on my podcast, our superpowers or our strengths? Because I really believe in deepening into strengths-based understanding and self-awareness, and using that as this thing that you ride on, that as the train that takes you to your next place. But first you have to know what they are and you have to celebrate. Right. Anyway, I've kind of gone on and on. I could probably keep going on.
No, I mean, I love it. I love that. Well, I could so relate to the dancing and like buying the classes. It's like,
yeah,
I think that's something that probably a lot of people can relate to. Oh, I want this. I'm going to invest in it. And then I'm not going to follow through because I'm afraid. And something. Then you have fears of money fears, or like there's other fears in there too. Like I'm sure whether you were conscious of it or not, the like, oh my God, I'm missing out. Yeah. The shame of like, I say I want to do these things and then I don't follow through. Is this how I'm going to be the rest of my life? I do stuff for other people, not for me. I'm sure you had a lot of voices in there saying a lot of things to you, which is what drove you back in. Yeah. But I love that you powered through the fear of being like, I feel really out of place, but this is what I really want to do. And now you compete, and I want to share pictures and some of your videos of that because it's just, they're amazing and you're beautiful. Wow. And so where are you? I know you're a champion. How does tell us about your awards. Like what did you place? And then how did that feel? Like, and how did that feel like? Did you have any moments like with your friends or family of being like, I placed first, or did you feel weird sharing that with anybody, your kids or anybody?
Okay. Can I be honest on this show?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So, I think you and I have talked about the idea of competition, and it's an interesting thing. So on the one hand, I don't really consider myself to be very competitive, or I didn't used to consider myself to be very competitive. And and part of that is I don't want to compete with people. I don't want to beat them. I don't want to lose to them. And I also don't want to beat them. I don't like comparison. Like not that crazy about comparison and competition. And so the reality is that when I say I love competition, and I really do, now I know I love competition. But what I love about competition is the opportunity to stretch yourself, to test yourself,
Mm-hmm.
um, mark where you are from one place to another, and also to test your mental model and your mindset around how do you deal with adversity, because going onto a competition floor is scary and you have to deal with nerves. And I love the challenge of dealing with difficult things and dealing with nerves. And can you keep your composure? I mean, I remember a couple of times where I lost my mindset and I would be like, my stomach, my bowels would be like, or my mouth would completely dry out because I didn't manage it. And then like the process of looking at how do I deal with this adversity of going onto a competitive floor and deal with the nerves and still perform. How do I balance performing with my technique? All this kind of challenge, basically the generalizable thing that might be relatable to everyone, regardless of what it is you're doing, is the idea of how do you take a challenge and how do you roll with it? How do you balance all the competing needs in this particular thing that you're doing? And I'm a process person ultimately. So the idea of winning the world title, truthfully, didn't really matter that much to me. At the time, I didn't really, so the truth is, like, the secret now is that the world title really didn't mean that much to me, but it is a really good story. And it does give me credibility that I won a world, and it does help share my message that you can go from one thing to another thing in a powerful way. So at the time it was exciting, but I didn't even realize I'd be talking about it. I never in a million years on that day when I was standing there on the podium with, the funny thing is that they played the Star Spangled Banner. And at the time I think I was still Canadian at that point. And I'm like, people put their hands on their heart. And I was like, oh, I think at the time, if you told me, Lisa, 2 or 3 years from now, you're going to be telling everybody about how you won a world title, I would have been like, no.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think it's interesting because like it was never about that. It was about you doing something that you wanted to do.
Yes.
And that's what was actually able to power you through the fears in the first place of like being competitive. Well, stepping through those doors and then, being competitive. It was never about the competition. It was like, what do I have in
process.
Me? Like, like this is how far can I stretch my comfort zone for me?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing when I was an actor. Of course, you're thrilled when you get a part, and the challenge is, can I get the part? Can I do it? But ultimately underneath it, I had to always come back to the fact that I am doing this because I love the challenge of stretching myself as a human being, which is how I saw acting. It's almost, I took it on like being in a martial arts studio where I'm like, how centered can I be? How much can I stay in the process of feeling okay about myself in the face of constant rejection that comes even with the working act, even for working actors. Totally. And that was kind of my process, and my personal challenge was, how can I be present with myself at all times?
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. And, the thing too is there's a lot of studies that they say, well, first of all, the people who are really successful just push themselves 12% out of their comfort zone. It doesn't have to be 100% out of your comfort zone. And that's kind of what you were doing was aging. You were like, 12% out of my comfort zone is actually going in and just asking questions.
Yeah.
Then another 12% is going back, and so you were taking baby step comfort zone movements, which is actually
nice.
How we get to those places of success. People think it's like all the time that you have to go way outside of your comfort zone, but then you have a meltdown and you freak out.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to happen. So you were doing that. But the other thing that strikes me as well is when you mentioned that is going outside of our comfort zone, we know is what brings us happiness as humans. We
Yeah.
have to go outside of our comfort zone. It's one of the happiness triggers in our brain.
Interesting.
And so, as people get older, they should be going out of their comfort zone because that is one of the main things that we need
Yeah.
to do.
Yep. Absolutely. And, I have a model that sort of has some touch points on it in terms of how we can address transition more effectively, but also that includes how we can approach aging. And you're just hitting on one of them. I mean, I call it sometimes I call it learning, but I actually like it more as challenge because it actually fits my model a little better, which is mostly C's. And I think you're right. It's like, how do we challenge ourselves, which can be learning new things, which can be testing ourselves, which can be starting something new. So I think that's really, really important. And the thing that it's also leading to is one of the other pieces that is really important to me around transition and around aging, and that is community and connection. Mm-hmm. And we know, because we support each other and other people in our group, with how do you deal with it when you're going outside of your comfort zone. And when you go outside of your comfort zone, if you're human, regardless of who you are, regardless of how, people you might see that other person, well, they've got it all together and they're doing just fine and they're perfect. They are the exact same things. They've got the same little voices going, not good enough, too much this, not enough of that. Who are you to do this? It's too late. You don't have enough education. You're not smart enough, but all that noise, right? And so connection and community is what comes in to say, hey, I'm feeling this noise. I'm feeling this little gremlin telling me I'm not enough or I can't do it. And that's when our community and our people we're connected with come back in to reflect ourselves back to us to say, no, that's just your fear. You're just in the 12% zone outside of your comfort. It's okay, keep going.
Totally.
Totally. And that's what we do for each other.
Totally. It makes me think actually of, so my original business name, you've been with me through this process, was the Gutsy Grackle. And people ask me all the time, like, why did you call your business the Gutsy Grackle? And the story is actually, I saw grackles jump out of nests before they have their feathers. They're fledgling birds. So I walked outside. I saw this baby bird without any feathers. I thought he was a robin, but I immediately knew he was a grackle because the whole grackle family was like, don't touch our baby. Like they immediately came over. The mom, the dad, brothers, cousins, everybody was there. And I was like, okay, I won't touch the baby, but can I witness this from afar? And so I was very respectful. Over the course of the week, I saw this baby learn how to fly. And as his feathers would slowly grow in, and his mother would actually work really closely while the other birds would watch for predators. And then there were some birds that were like his cheerleader team. And he would you could see his thought process of how he wanted to fly. And he would run and then try and jump, but it wouldn't work. And so then he got up on a rock and he was like, I'm going to run across this rock and then I'm going to jump and I'm going to fly. And he wouldn't. And he'd have these mental breakdowns, and the mother would come over and put her wing around him and feed him. And in my head, she's like, it's okay. You're just hangry. And at night they would hide him in the tall grass. And then during the day, they'd bring him back out and practice all day long. And one day I saw him in the tiniest little tree with his legs were shaking. He got up there and he had more feathers. And I was like, baby Grackle, you made it to the tiniest trees. I totally did. And he made it. And I was like, oh my God, it takes a lot of guts to jump out of a nest without any feathers, knowing you can't fly. And you might have to be on the ground for a whole week with predators that want to eat you while you try and figure out how to get up into the air. And I was like, wow, that takes a lot of guts. And then I was like, why do birds, not all birds, but why do some birds jump out of the nest before they have feathers? Why would they even do that? That's crazy. And I learned that they have to, because if they stay in the nest, they will be killed by parasites.
Oh.
And so this became an analogy actually for me of you have two choices. You can
get eaten
in a comfortable nest and die of parasites, or you can jump without any feathers and know that your community is going to hold you and feed you and support you and cheer you on.
Oh my
And
God.
that takes a lot of guts. And that's why the grackle is my medicine bird. And everybody's like, why grackle? And I'm like, because I witnessed it. And I've witnessed it with you and our sisterhood, with Women Speak. Like, you know, Lisa and I and Randy and the other women, we have these breakdowns where it's like,
Yeah.
Randy's on Instagram crying yesterday. And then the three of us jump into a Marco Polo and it's like, what can I do to support you?
Yeah.
How can I cheer you
I think that's
on?
just your voice.
I think that's just your voice.
Yeah.
We need to, you know, and, you know, you and the three of us, we meet every week and we talk about how we can support each other and we're each other's cheerleaders. And when we are together, we're feeding each other, and it is that, like,
and
that is so necessary.
Yeah. And the thing is that you can do that anytime, right? You can build those kind of relationships. And I think that there is sometimes a bit of fear around that for people, for some people more than others. I mean, and some people need it also in different ways, in different styles, depending on whether you're extroverted or introverted, depending on where you live, what kind of access you have. But the thing is, you can always reach out to people. And I think the internet has made that so much more possible. Like, here we are, thousands of miles away, having a conversation.
Right.
You know, there's so many mechanisms for creating connection. And part of it just is the recognition, the desire to do it, the intent to do it. And then sometimes taking that 12% risk to say, okay, I'm going to show what's really true for me. And then maybe you show it in a small group or with one person. But that if you don't have connections, if you don't have connections that are meaningful, if you don't have connections that are supportive and that celebrate you and that see who you are and who you're becoming, then go form them. Just go form them. Find the people that see you for who you are and who you could be in your best self, and they're willing to like stand up and say, no, I believe in you.
Who can relate to you?
Yeah.
Like, in whatever capacity that is. It's like, you know, I've created a community of women who have fur babies who can relate to each other. They know how to speak to each other when they've experienced loss. They know how to speak about, you know, just different things that other people who don't have animals might not understand. And you're creating a community and have created a community of women who, you know, are entering a new phase of their life and are thriving in it and like enjoying themselves and exploring new things. And I love that. And it's so true. Like, we have to find our communities, and communities intertwine, you know, like that's, and then it expands and grows, which is why I wanted to bring you to my community, is because not everyone in my community has animals, but not everyone is going to understand or be at the place where they feel like, oh, I need Lisa's wisdom right now.
Right. But it's interesting that you made that connection. Like, I would not have thought of it. And as soon as you said it, of course, it makes sense that, well, first of all, I mean, we're all aging. But like you said, there are a lot of the people, there are going to be people in your community that are similar, and there's an overlap to the people in my community where they're dealing with transitions, where they're dealing with loss and dying, where they're dealing with fear about aging for themselves or for people or animals they love, where they're dealing with emotions and how to manage their emotions and how to have their thinking process be a place that is a good place for them and for their animals and the people around them to be. There's so much, we're human, you know, we're delicate humans that have, you know, so much, you know, we have stuff in common.
Yeah. And the more connections we can get, I mean, it's like, you know, having older women root you on is going to sound different than having a younger woman root you on, you know, It's because we've had different experiences. We've been in different places. In fact, I remember, this always makes me laugh. My friend's niece was, 18, I think at the time, 17, 18. She was going through a breakup. I happened to be at my friend's house. She was over there just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing because her and her boyfriend, you know, had just broken up. And I was trying to console her. And I remember her at one point being like, "What do you know? You're an old woman." And I was like, well, first of all, I'm only 30. And second of all, I've had heartbreak. But to her, I was outside of her, like, connection of what she needed. She would have been able to relate so much better to an 18 or 19-year-old who'd been going through the same thing. And so, it's finding your people.
You know what? Yeah, sorry, go on. Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No. I'll keep my thought.
Okay. Yeah. And I was just going to say, and that's why I love, everything you're doing, everything you're saying, how you're making it available in so many different ways. You're speaking on big, awesome stages. You have a podcast where, you're connecting in ways for other people as well. And so I just want everybody to know that, like, Lisa is very, well, I called you when one of the last times we hung out in person, I said, you remind me of an oak tree, because oak trees feed. They're the mothers of the forest, and they feed nutrients to other little trees that need it. And that's how I see you in so many different ways, because with your podcast and your speaking, you're sending out nutrients and information to people in all sorts of different ways that might be needed. And that's how I will always see you, as the tree.
I love that so much. I just love that. Yeah. I appreciate that. Well, the little brief aside I just want to comment on that you made me think of is another piece that I think is really important for the future and the new world and where we're going is this cross-pollination of ideas. And I know I can tell you for myself that some of my best parenting and input and advice I get comes from my friends who are 20, 22, 24. They're actually closer to my kids' age than to mine. And I get so much wisdom and insight from them. And so we live in a world now where we're not siloed by age in the ways that we have been in the past, where we are much more connected through our interests or through our commitments or through our passions, and less so by age or location. And so that's a thing to just take so much advantage of when you're building your communities and your connections, is the fact that there's a richness in this ability to cross-pollinate across generations. So I'm really grateful for that piece in our current day.
You say that. I'm listening to Brene Brown's book, Dare to Lead. And she says at one point she had a massive head concussion and couldn't work, and then was freaking out because her brain wasn't working. And if you know Brene Brown, she's using her brain a lot. And she basically said she was in bed crying and having a mental breakdown. And then she's like, I got the most amazing wisdom from a family friend who was 19 years old. And when she said that, I was like, it's awesome to hear Brene Brown say, I got my wisdom from a 19-year-old, which goes to what you were saying. And it's true. It's totally true. So before we wrap up, what is one thing you could share with women who are maybe growing older or feeling some fear around aging? Is there one piece of wisdom you'd like to share?
Well, I mean, I see it as a bunch of things, and we've already mentioned a couple of them, right? And one of them is to be challenged by learning new things. Another one is to create communities and connections. And then the other one that I think is contribute, look for ways that you can make a difference, because one of the really beautiful things about making a contribution is it can be small. It can be as simple as being really sweet and nice to someone that is, taking your money at a restaurant or a cashier. It can be bigger in responding to helping out someone else in some difficult situation that they're in. It can be sharing some piece of information that you've had. But the beautiful thing about contribution is that it's bidirectional, that the giver receives and the receiver gives, and there's almost no distinction between them. So if you're looking for a place to experience vibrancy and involvement and engagement in your life, just look for a place to give to someone else. And that could be, one of your animal babies too.
Yeah.
And I think that your story about Holly is a really good example of that, where, and I don't know if your community knows that story, but the fact that Holly, who knew whether Holly was giving you or you were giving to Holly?
Right.
There's such reciprocity to contribution and to generosity that I think anywhere we can look for places to give it, in smaller, big ways, smaller and large ways,
totally
is a huge gift to our own lives.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it really is, we are all connected, and contributing to the collective is beneficial for everybody, including the person who's giving.
Yeah. And, speaking of which, as an example of that, I haven't thought this through. This is kind of off the cuff. And I don't know if this is going to be me giving or offering or me receiving. Uh, Maybe most things that are really beautiful are like that. You can't really tell which is which. But I really am looking at working and building towards a mastermind next year for women in this situation. And I would love to have a couple of women to work through some of my steps with. And I want to put out to your community that I really have like two or three spots to work with women. I'd really like to work with some women individually. So
Wow. That's actually super generous. Thank you.
yeah, it's going to be like super reduced in price, mostly just to say, hey, I'm committed to this. So if there's anyone in your community that wants to reach out to me for that, and they could send an email to me at lisa@lisabl.com and mention your name in the subject line and tell me why it'd probably be like a 2-month, 8-week individualized coaching program.
Wow. To help them through that.
Partly because
aging, figuring it out.
Partly because I want to just test some of my principles. So It would be like a beta. So that's why it's going to be like massively reduced in price.
Awesome.
And just if they're interested, just to have them send me an email and tell me why this sounds like it might be something that would be appropriate for them, a little bit of what's going on in their life and what they see themselves doing with it.
That's really cool. So what we'll do is in the notes, I will put a link to your email and just all the information, what they need to do and what that looks like. And then where else can they follow you? And I'll also put links, but where else are you where you would like to be?
We'll definitely put a link to our conversation, and I would love your community to listen to my podcast in general. There's a lot of really interesting conversations with people,
and by the way, everybody, that was my favorite podcast interview that I did so far. Somebody else was like, "Oh, I'm going to listen to this one podcast interview." I was like, "Don't listen to that one. Listen to this one."
Oh, that's cute. I did like it. It was really, really fun. So subscriptions to my podcast are super helpful for me, and reviews on the podcast platform. They want to follow on Facebook. The place to look is Superpower U. It's letter U. I have a page, so they can follow that page or join that page. That would be great.
Okay.
And then on Instagram, I'm at Lisa BL, and I'm moving most of my social media to Instagram. So would love your community to follow.
Yeah, loves the support. This goes back to, the grackle jumping out of the nest and everybody cheering them on. It's like people don't realize you have this big message and you want to share it, but it requires a flock of people cheering and liking and saying, we're going to support you. We're going to help you while we're going to hide you in the grass at night. We're going to bring you back out. Like we're going to do all this stuff to help you so that you can fly. And that's, what it really is. And that's why I want to interview you. It's like, I want to help you. I want to help me, but I really want to help the women.
Me too.
Listening to this. And it goes to what you said, like when you give, you are receiving the collective wins.
Yes.
And that's what all of these interviews are going to be about, is the collective winning, because we're all getting help and information.
Yeah, exactly. And I love supporting women and helping them and seeing that light that goes on in their head when they actually realize that there's possibility. And so I'm so grateful to you for having me on your show. This is so fun.
Everybody watching or listening, like Lisa is so good at holding, and like the fact that you're doing a mastermind is amazing. I'm like, do I qualify in my age? Because you're such a good listener, like with fertile listening. You're so good at that. You're so good at holding people and holding space. So that's perfect. Awesome. Well, everybody, I will leave all of the information in the notes. And Lisa, it was so awesome having you here with me. I love you, and I can't wait to see you in person again, which is probably going to be in September.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you to your community. And, I appreciate you and love you. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Have a great day.